Welcome to RHI Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today, we're meeting with Philip Kolvin, former chair of the London Nighttime Commission. So I'm with Philip Kolvin. He is a genius in nighttime management and has led many initiatives in the UK, worked on much of the legislation that led to the 24/7 licensing, was involved in the Best Bar None program, which is a certification of responsibility for venues, the Purple Flag, which documents a district's approach, a town center approach to nighttime management. And he served as the first chair of the London Nighttime Commission and was appointed by the mayor and put together a comprehensive plan for the mayor about the future of nightlife. Naturally, as we met in Seattle, Philip, you spent some more time discussing what some of the trends were, how people's lifestyles were changing, and how town centers and high streets were really facing potential loss and really challenges with the way the society was changing. But now we've been totally disrupted by COVID. So my question to you is let's just take a second to look back on that moment when we were in Seattle and how within just 7 months since we've been there, things have changed. What do you envision is the overriding forces that are changing our society?
Well, obviously, apart from the health consequences, there's clearly massive economic consequences. But some of the most serious economic consequences have been to the hospitality industry, and people who've been accustomed to socialize together in places have been unable to do that. In my country, there's been a whole series of laws and regulations. I think there have been more amendments to the coronavirus restrictions regulations in 6 months than there have been amendments to the American Constitution in 231 years. And so it's an unstable business environment, and it's quite a frightening social environment in which people have been atomized, bars have closed, businesses have gone under, whole companies have gone under. And people have been thrown back on their own devices. Over the summer months, we saw lots of gatherings in parks, but as the winter nights draw in, I think everyone's hunkering down and accepting that it's going to be quite a long and lonely winter. And so the question now is, we've seen all the consequences. Is it going to be a question of a curve down and then a curve back and a plateau? Or are we eventually going to come back at a lower level? And what influence can we have as policymakers and advisors to see if we can build back better?
So there are some people who say that going back to the way things were doesn't necessarily make sense because there are many things that weren't working in the way things were. What opportunities do you think exist now for reimagining or recreating the structures and the environments, both regulatory and business and district management and venue operations, and even adapting to this new generation of patrons who have a different way of socializing, which was already playing out, like you said, when we were in Seattle? Will this just exacerbate some of the challenges that town centers and high streets faced? Or do you think this is an opportunity to reimagine a new way in which people will live and socialize?
The answer to your question is yes, all of the above. Just take a couple of things. One of the things I was talking about in Seattle was how there's an inexorable tide where people are getting more of their goods and services at home. So shops are closing, people are getting deliveries from Deliveroo, people are piping in their films on Netflix. We can't turn back those tides are continuing. So what I was talking about in Seattle was how we can try and make cities more resilient against these forces so that we don't lose them as places to socialize and dance and fall in love and do all the things which make us human. What I think has happened is two things. The one is that coronavirus has accentuated all of those trends. People are more averse to going into the town centres to shop. The cinemas are closed, so people are getting more of their films piped in from Netflix and more of their food coming in on Deliveroo and Uber Eats. So all of that is actually happening. So all of those predictions have simply been accelerated. But on the other hand, 6 or 7 months on, I think we can see some actual green shoots. I mean, I live in London, and Westminster, in the heart of London, is one of the main entertainment districts in the world, and Westminster is now very quiet. But the suburbs are now very busy, and so smaller independent operators, whether they're retailers or service providers or hospitality providers, haven't done too badly. People don't want to travel in, but they do want to shop locally. They do want to sit outside a cafe locally. And I think that's one of the things which gives us a clue about how things might be. I think that we've seen, partly government inspired, partly because of local campaigners, we've seen a concept called low traffic neighborhoods. People have worked out the great beauty of active travel. You see far more kids cycling to school now. You see far more elderly people walking down the street to the shops rather than driving to the shops. And so I think we can easily generate a vision where urban planning correlates with hospitality planning to make really vibrant social spaces in our suburban areas. So I do think that it rather behoves us not just to focus on the negative, but to focus on the opportunities which are going to arise out of this crisis. And I think we're already seeing that happening, and we should work out what we can do to ride that wave and encourage more of the same.
So along those lines, then, what's your vision of what could happen in the high streets, and especially, I think, this I remember back when the 24/7 licensing legislation was being proposed, there was a philosophy among some that said it would help to replicate the European cafe society, the outdoor seating, the umbrellas, the people, being outdoors. And for the most part, that in the early days of that transition, it didn't seem to materialize. So now you're seeing a lot more people discovering outdoor seating, and a lot more city planners saying, if we want to get rid of traffic, let's just take over all the parking lanes and make them into outdoor seating spaces. And and you had that migration of particularly young people into the cities for that very purpose of being able to have those local experiences, which is what you're talking about. But with the infrastructure of older cities like London, with narrow sidewalks and very limited opportunity to expand for this kind of al fresco experience, do you think that will be one of the advantage of the suburban spaces, because they tend to have more flexibility in the expansion of their outdoor seating and cafe society?
I mean, not only do they, but it's happening. We're seeing it. You've got visionary local authorities saying, well, why do we need 30 meters of road laterally? Why can't we take out 10 meters of that and turn it into pedestrian space, and then turn the sidewalks into al fresco seating? So that is actually happening, and people are taking advantage. We're also seeing more flexible ways of working. If people are working at home and they're getting their work done, maybe the employer isn't as concerned about whether they're working 9 till 5. Maybe they can meet their friends for a couple of hours at lunchtime while the sun is out, while it's warmer. So the whole way that the nighttime economy worked was very much predicated around people having to work in the day and therefore having to go out at night. Well, maybe COVID has given us an opportunity to rethink that as well. But if you're going to socialize during the day, you probably don't want to be drunk. So maybe you want more coffee, maybe you want more interesting street food happening as well. So people have got a limited amount of money in their pocket. Maybe they're going to spend that on things other than alcohol. And I do think that one of the messages that we've got from coronavirus is that biodiversity is a really good thing, and that by destroying biodiversity, we unbalance the world and make it unhealthy and allow viruses to propagate. And I would make exactly the same point about the social economy. In our country, the legislative changes and the Licensing Act produced almost no benefits at all. They didn't produce a cafe society, because you cannot produce a cafe society by writing some words in legislation. It doesn't happen. What makes these things happen is social changes and market forces. And as it happens at the beginning of the 2000s, the big pubcos were setting up high volume vertical drinking establishments, which were making people socialize by standing up with pints of beer in their hand. Well, now it's turned. Now in England, the big thing is street food. So we're seeing a much bigger diversity in entertainment provision. Now, what's happening in our country, I can't speak for the world, I'd love to be able to, but I can't, is that rents have been sky high. Premises have been bought up by pension funds and by larger companies with investor finance. And all of those companies are falling into administration and liquidation. And so premises are falling vacant. Who are the most agile operators to move into those spaces? Well, it's smaller, local businesses. It's the smaller independents who've got an interesting, diverse business idea. Well, we should be encouraging that and trying to make that happen more and more and create that sort of diversity on the high street. And if you do that, you'll solve an awful lot of the problems about alcohol-driven premises as well. So I do see a really clear route to producing district centres, maybe even town centres, based on local diversity, trading with a large mix of different hours, attracting a wide age range of people, and not so based on alcohol or driven by alcohol, but creating much more social spaces for local people based on local businesses, local workers, and most importantly, keeping money local so that the profits from the business are not taken abroad, but money spent locally, raised locally, then goes to support a local economy. So I can see a really clear route for those authorities and those business associations that want to not only help their areas survive, but prosper as a result of this virus.
What I hear you saying are two different messages. One is you see suburban areas as the potential for growth, but then also you see the opportunities for the town centers in the more urban environments to reconfigure themselves. Property owners are going to obviously be cash short, so they're going to adjust their rent and lease standards, and it'll be more attractive to the local independent venue operators who might bring a diversity of social experiences. Now, over the past 30 or 40 years, there's been a global movement of densifying cities with high-rise housing and corporate office buildings in the town center, the city centers. And so that growth was what was being projected as the future. But you see in Manhattan, for instance, people migrating out of the city and people looking to be more in the suburban environment. Are we going to just have that as a short-term kind of reflex, but that people will still want to have that urban live, work, play within walking, biking, Uber, Lyft, taxi service environments? Or do you think that the town centers and the urban centers will become like in the 70s, just dead zones and vacant buildings and crime and other things going on? I mean, do you think there's still hope for that vision of a dense living environment in the cities, or do you think it's going to be dispersed?
I think that, what happened in the 70s was rather particular to the 70s, where town centres certainly across the West, just fell flat and fell vacant and became dangerous voids. I think you've got to look at this city by city. So, for example, cities which have got major financial centres, I don't think are going to fall flat. But there are a number of cities, I think, where that are dependent on mid-range offices, which could potentially fall flat, and there'll be a lot of voids. There'll be a lot of businesses operating, call centers and service centers, which can do it a lot more cheaply by keeping their workers at home. Now, what's going to happen to those spaces? If nothing happens to those spaces, the whole hospitality industry, which relied on the workers coming in daily, are going to fall flat as well. In England, there is a major housing crisis. There's hundreds of thousands of people who just don't have an opportunity to get their own home, whether rented or bought. And there'll definitely be a temptation, encouraged by government, which is desperate to keep buildings occupied, to convert a lot of current hospitality space and office space into not very good quality housing. I think that would be an absolute disaster, because we'll lose the heart and soul of town city centres, because once that conversion happens, those buildings will never come back. So we definitely have to rethink the role of those town centres which are losing some of their business space. And I feel that there's two things here. One of the frictions which have happened in the nighttime economy has been the friction between the very late night economy and local residents. And you can pick any town or city you like, and that has been a real sense of friction. As cities have become more dense, there's then a conflict between the late night economy and the cities. And I think one of the things which authorities have to do is look very carefully at where the late night economy is happening, because it's not working, in my perception, to have several nightclubs butting up against large residential areas. It just doesn't work. But nightclubs work brilliantly in former print works, in former depots, in warehouses and railway stations, and you can make fantastic spaces away from residential areas for people to go and dance. You couldn't do that previously. It worked in places like Amsterdam, which were small cities and were walkable, but it didn't work in bigger cities because you couldn't get people home from those areas. But in the days of app-based private hire operators, people can call up their Uber or their Lyft or their Bolt, and they can get themselves home without too great an expense. And I do think that if you're going to plan this strategically, you get late night users away from the more dense city centre residential areas. But the second thing, I think, is that you can't just rely on the market here, because property owners will try and get their buildings filled quickly. And I do worry that in the next year or two, there might be a flight to residential, and we will never get back the sort of heart and soul of city centres. And I think this is where city planners have to come in and reconceptualise their city centres and preserve the opportunity for all sorts of other uses, like, I'm making it up, cooperative spaces, immersive theatre, artists' hubs, and so forth, to try and ensure that city centres remain a place of sort of gathering and enlightenment and artistic endeavour. That, in my mind, is going to take intervention at a governance level to ensure that these spaces survive over the next decade.
That's great. It seems that you've expanded your examples from when we were in Seattle, but the track that you're on is very similar in terms of what you see as the future. Now, I know you just bought a house up in Nova Scotia. You're going to build a nice stone fence. Working in the fields when you plant your gardens and picking up the stones and building your stone walls. But supposing I come there in 3 years and we're sitting around your fire and we're talking about the time that we met in 2020, and you're going to tell me what the state of socializing is, and you're going to do that in 90 seconds.
These are the things. We're going to have a diverse set of local economies where people have got provision for their ability to socialise within 15 minutes of where they live. You're going to have a choice of eateries and drinking places and music venues, probably operating at all sorts of different times of day and night, within a very short walk of your home. You will be able to walk it. You won't be choked up by traffic, and your kids will be able to play in the street. We're going to reinvent the concept of neighborhood. We're going to enjoy the idea of the social economy as something which espouses healthy lifestyles. and we're going to have a social economy which is ethical. It doesn't just mean providing people whatever sells the most, whether it's alcohol or fatty foods. Everybody at governance level, at business level, and at consumption level is going to view the social economy as a place for ethical practice and ethical discourse. That's my hope for the social economy as part of a good society. And we've all had to think about community and what it means to be part of society as a result of this crisis. And I hope that those words creep their way in to the way we think about the work that we do.
Very good, Philip. Well, I'm going to end this recording, and I want to thank you again for your time and your wisdom, and I'm sure it will be well received. And I think you'll be a great participant in the upcoming summit that we're going to do in March.